Hello and welcome to Cryptid by State, Louisiana. Over the past few months, this state has received quite a lot of votes, with the final tally being 25. At this point, I think it is more requested than any other locations that we have visited. Speaking of which, this marks the 23rd entry in that series, so we have only 2 more left to go for our big recap video. As a heads up, Louisiana tried to keep a lot of its cryptids hidden from me, but I did eventually manage to wrestle quite a few of them out of the shadows. Of course, this state is known for the very popular Rougarou, but I like to focus on lesser known ones more. Now, as many of you know, I try my best to get pronunciations as accurate as possible. As such, I use multiple sources to try to pin down how something is frequently said. Of course, this plays a role with this state, since there is quite a debate over how a certain city is pronounced. From what I have gathered, it boils down to 3. New Orleans, New Orleans, or New Orleans. The second version seems the most agreed upon version, so I'll be sticking with that one. Be sure to let me know if this is correct or not in the comment section. With that out of the way, let's buckle up once again for our Cryptid family road trip as we venture from West Virginia to Louisiana. Historically, Louisiana was an area that was inhabited by quite a few Native American nations. As such, many of the present-day locations are still named after their tribes and languages. In 1528, Spanish explorer Pánfilo de Narvaez was credited as the first European to discover the mouth of the Mississippi River, but he really didn't even venture onto the land. In fact, famed explorer Hernando de Soto attempted to explore the area in 1542 to 1543, but was basically chased out by the native tribes who viewed them, rightfully so, as a threat. There is a story about his venture where the tribes were lined up along the Mississippi River and continually rained down arrows on De Soto's ships. At one point, the men on board would actually utilize their sleeping mats to block the barrage of projectiles. Apparently, the aggression was so strong that Spain actually lost interest in trying to stake a claim in the area for quite some time. Yet, in 1682, French explorer Robert Cavelier de La Salle was more successful than the Spanish, although most settlements were mainly on the outskirts of the state near the Gulf of Mexico. De La Salle did give this area its name in honor of King Louis XIV. Eventually, they did push further north and built settlements in Canada. It should be noted that in the 1720s, German immigrants would also call this land home in what is known as the German coast. With the Treaty of Paris in 1763, at the end of the 7 Years' War, France gave up most of its land to Spain. They would remain in control until 1800, when Napoleon Bonaparte secretly agreed to the Treaty of San Ildefonso on October 1st, in which Spain would give up its lands in North America in exchange for lands in Tuscany. 4 short years later, Napoleon would end up selling his lands to the US since he realized it would be futile to try to keep any land holdings there. It would then be known as the Territory of Orleans until April 30th, 1812, when it officially became the 18th state to join the Union. The flag is one that really makes me happy that I include this part in each video. Up until making this, I had no idea that the flag was designed in such a fashion, and it may have been the first time I have ever seen it. Honestly, I had to double check things to make sure it wasn't some kind of variant of some sort. The flag was officially adopted in 1912, and it depicts the state bird, the brown pelican, shielding its 3 young. It is said that the bird's design actually mimics the symbol of Louisiana, which would be the fleur-de-lis. There are 3 drops of blood on the bird's chest, which indicates it's sacrificing itself to feed its young. This behavior isn't actually something the real bird does, but it does represent the state's view of self-sacrifice and dedication to progress. It also is said to represent the citizens keeping Cajun tradition alive. At one point, the flag was produced without the blood, but this was changed in April of 2006, where it was now required to be present by law. Underneath the bird is the state's motto of Union, Justice, Confidence. For years, this was presented as Union, Justice, and Confidence, but for some reason the "and" was removed in November of 2010. So, enough about history, let's talk about cryptids. As stated previously, I have to admit that I did encounter a bit of trouble uncovering what creatures call this state home. Apparently, the bayou wishes to keep its secrets to itself. Due to this, my list isn't as robust as I normally like it to be, but I did eventually uncover at least 12 of them. So, without further ado, let's get into them. It wouldn't be proper to talk about Louisiana without mentioning a few creatures that are said to make the swamps their home. From what I have read, a lot of people consider this being an urban legend, but others say it is very real. It is known as the Parlangua, and it is said to reside in the area of Rapides Parish near the city of Alexandria. It is described as being part man and part alligator, but for all extensive purposes, it is a lizard man. It is said to stand around 10 feet tall, is covered in green scales that are said to be bulletproof, is superhumanly strong, it has long black talons on each of its digits, red eyes, of course, and a very long tail that it utilizes as a weapon. Its head is very much like an alligator since it has a long snout with many sharp teeth in its mouth, but is normally seen walking on its back legs. One of the oddest characteristics is the fact that it can apparently roar very loudly. If this wasn't bad enough, apparently it is known to be able to climb trees easily. There are many rumors as to what this being is, such as a vengeful spirit, a deformed human, to a military project gone wrong. Sightings of this creature are said to date back to the 1960s, but there really hasn't been any physical proof of it. Normally, this detail makes the creature questionable, but from the tales I have read, it may actually be a cryptid that doesn't leave any victims alive to provide proof. A frequently cited encounter claims that at one point the police were called to the nearby swamp where a car had been found submerged under the water. When they removed the vehicle, they found the bodies of both passengers inside, but the driver's window had been smashed in and the body was half eaten. Many people in the area have reported that many of their large livestock had went missing. When investigated, a drag-marked trail was found leading towards the swamp. This is where a pile of carcasses was discovered, all half-eaten. Many assume that this creature likes to drag its victims to a certain location in order to finish them off. What can be said is that this being is popular enough to have a song written about it in 1983 by a band named the Cahoots. It's not very often you find that. In line with this is another creature that I can't find very many details about, but it is known as the Dino Gator, and by all accounts, it is a normal alligator, but it is said to be about 50 feet long. I don't know how something that massive could hide, but I do appreciate the story. Another oddity that falls in this realm is the being known as the Latiche. This one has various legends behind its origins, including stories from Native American lore. While its beginning is debated, all agree that it is normally found in the Terrebonne Parish area and is a human-like alligator. It likes to spend all of its time in the swamps looking for prey. Normally, it chooses to flip over boats and then attack the passengers that fall into the water. I found some legends claiming that its eyes were hypnotic and could cause its victims to become paralyzed. Others state that it can be detected by the strong smell of rotting vegetation. Although, with that detail, I don't know how helpful that would be in a swamp. Moving on to something that doesn't call a swamp its home is the Grunt. This creature is said to make its home on Grunt Road and other locations around New Orleans. The legends surrounding it date back to when people first started making the location a home, and sightings have been prevalent up until 2007. Now, much like other Louisiana lore, the description varies drastically depending on what version you're looking at. In one tale, they are actually a group of albino little people who were shunned and became bloodthirsty. In another version, they appear to be some type of small, intelligent monkey. Although, the more interesting version is that of the state's own chupacabra. This one is described as standing only 3 to 4 feet tall, its head is semi-goat or bulldog-like, its skin is black or gray and covered in scales, it has spikes running down its back, it is very intelligent, and its eyes glow a bluish-green color. Much like the chupacabra, it will attack animals to drain blood, but rather than 2 puncture marks, it leaves 1. The grunt is said to have a very pungent smell and has a scream or howl that is likened to that of a banshee. Many stories have emerged that people in the area are not fond of leaving their pets outside, since they can become easy prey. This is also confirmed by a report from a woman in Harvey who claimed to have actually seen one of these beings eating a neighbor's dog. Now let's look to the skies, since Louisiana is said to have a thunderbird flying around. This bird has been spotted all over the state, but an interesting report mentions one in Marthaville. In 1978, a man named Terrell Wilson and his brother were staying at their grandfather's farm during the summer. While there, he heard his grandfather and his great-uncle named Buddy discussing how they had recently found several of their cattle mutilated by what appeared to be an abnormally large bird. At first, the boys thought these stories were being told in order to scare them. Not long after this, they decided to hide in the woods by the pasture in order to keep an eye out for this alleged bird. Suddenly, the pair heard the thunderous sound of wings flapping, and to their shock, they saw a giant bird land on the far side of the pasture. Terrell claims it stood 8 feet tall, was more fowl-like than reptile, and its feathers were a dark gray color. The creature stood there for only a minute before the cows realized what was going on and started to stampede away from the being. The cattle actually started to run towards the boys, so the pair decided it was best to get away. Going from one flying animal to another, we find reports of pterosaurs still living in the state. Since 1994, there were at least 4 separate reports of people seeing this type of cryptid, 2 of which were over Lake Pontchartrain, 1 in Nulano, and the following report from the town of Slidell. On October 10, 2013, a woman was outside her house when she heard a sound very similar to a crow, but very much louder. As she looked up, she saw a creature flying that had smooth skin, a long neck, and its beak was filled with teeth. Fearful for her life, she went back inside and called the Game Commission, but they didn't take her call seriously. Jumping back to the Lake Pontchartrain sightings comes a report from a man named Ryan Kelsey. In 1994, Ryan was outside of his vehicle since it had broke down. While standing there, he noticed a large flying creature that he assumed to be a blackbird. As it neared, he realized that it wasn't a bird, but more of a pterosaur. He stated that it was around 200 feet from him and stayed 20 feet above the lake's surface. From his point of view, he noted that it had a long tail, shiny leathery skin, a long beak, its wingspan was between 15 and 20 feet, and its head ended in a point behind the neck, which was described as an elongated cone. As usual, I couldn't talk about every cryptid that this state houses, but that is what I have an honorable mentions section for. It should come as no surprise that Bigfoot is sighted in this area, along with the other version of it known as the skunk ape. It is worth noting that the Honey Island swamp monster is worthy to be on this list, but really it is basically a 3-toed Bigfoot. I also found an interesting story about a group of kids coming across what they describe as a pair of hellhounds in a local cemetery. Although, with that story, it does feel a lot more like the being known as a Grimm. As you may assume, there are tales about giant snakes in the swamp, although from what I could tell, none of them are named. Interestingly, I also saw reports of a type of sea serpent that was first spotted in 1864. Although, there are other sightings that are very similar to the plesiosaur type of creature. I found tales about a fairy type of being that enjoyed pranking people and was known as a luton. But again, much like a lot of Louisiana lore, I couldn't tell if the reports were believed real or just something to tell around a campfire. Finally, I debated including this one on the list, but there is a fascinating story about vampires in New Orleans. First, I wasn't sure if I consider a vampire a cryptid, and secondly, there is a lot of debatable information as to if these stories are even considered real in the state, or if they were made up to scare tourists. To follow up with this, if you are curious, the story would be about casket girls. As I end this video, I sincerely hope you enjoyed it, and as always, that I made the state proud. With this being our 23rd video in the series, we are rather quickly approaching our halfway mark. As such, we have quite a battle taking place between which state will have that spot. Currently, Georgia and Delaware are neck and neck, but there are at least 8 other states that aren't too far behind them. So it is important to keep voting, since a couple votes could change up the entire list. I know a couple of viewers do frequently vote for Delaware every video. I know many of you are well versed in how this voting is done, but I randomly find comments wondering how to vote. All you have to do is leave a comment on the most current video with the name of the state that you would like to see. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this. Also, it would be greatly appreciated if you share my videos with someone you know who may enjoy this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.